This is Vinita Sharma, and today we are going to start with the chapter of Class 8, Metals and Non-Metals. In previous class, Class 7, we have studied that in a chemical reaction, new substances are formed. These new substances have entirely different properties from those of its constituents. The substances which cannot be broken down into simple forms by chemical methods like heating, cooling, or by electrolysis is called element. Example: sulfur is an element, carbon is an element, hydrogen is an element. On the other hand, water is not an element because it can be split up into two simpler substances by electrolysis. Elements are categorized into metals, non-metals, and metalloids. What are metals? Metals are those elements which have a tendency to donate electrons and form electropositive ions. Non-metals are those elements which have a tendency to accept electrons and form electronegative ions. Metalloids are those elements which show the property of both metals and non-metals. Now we discuss about some physical properties of metals and non-metals. Now, first property of metals, physical property, is metals are malleable. Now, what do you understand by malleable? It's a property of metals which can be beaten into thin sheets. Example: gold, silver, aluminium. We see that aluminium foils are extensively used in wrapping food items. Silver foils are also used for decorating sweets, etc. Non-metals. Non-metals are non-malleable. Examples are sulfur and phosphorus. That means non-metals cannot be beaten into thin sheets. On hammering, they get broken into pieces. Second property of metals we discuss is metals are ductile. Now, what is ductility? It's a property of metals which can be drawn into thin wires. Example: copper and aluminium metals are extensively used in electrical wirings. Non-metals are non-ductile. Example: sulfur and phosphorus. Now, due to the property of malleability and ductility, metals can be molded into different shapes and different forms of articles can be made. The third property of metals are hard. Example: iron, copper, aluminium. Exception: some metals are there which are soft. These are sodium and potassium, which can be easily cut with a knife. Whereas non-metals, these are soft and brittle. Example is sulfur and phosphorus. But here is also an exception: diamond, an allotrope of carbon, which is the hardest substance known. Next property we come to sonorous. Metals are sonorous. Now, what do you mean by sonorous? They produces a ringing sound when they are struck. Now, metals produces a sound. Due to the property of sonorous, metals are used in bells. They are used in musical instruments, wires like sitar, guitar, violin, etc. Non-metals, they are non-sonorous. They do not produce sound. Next property, metals are lustrous. Lustrous means they have a shine. A metallic shine is present in metals. Due to this property of lustrousness, shyness, these metals are extensively used in making jewelries, ornaments, etc. Example: gold, Au, silver, Ag. These are the symbols of elements. Non-metals, they are non-lustrous, they are dull in appearance. But exception is there, iodine is the only non-metal which have lustrous. The next property we discuss is the physical state. Now, metals are generally solid at room temperature. Exception is there, mercury. Mercury is the only metal which is liquid at room temperature, and we use mercury in thermometers. Non-metals, they are usually found in solid form and in gaseous form. In solid form, you find carbon, sulfur, phosphorus, etc. And in gaseous form, you find hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen. Exception is your bromine, is the only non-metal which is liquid at room temperature. Next property we discuss, metals are good conductors of heat and electricity. Means metals allow heat and electricity to pass through them easily. Now we see that copper and aluminium metals, these are good conductors of heat. Therefore, the cooking utensils, water boilers, etc., these are made up of aluminium and copper metals. And moreover, metals are also good conductors of electricity because metals have free mobile electrons which constitute electricity and conduct high electricity. Example, silver is the best metal for conduction of electricity because silver is highly expensive. We use copper in electrical wires. So example is aluminium, silver and copper, which are good conductors of heat as well as electricity. Non-metals, these are poor conductors of heat and electricity. Exception, there is graphite. Graphite is the only non-metal which is a good conductor of electricity. That's why in electrodes, graphites are used. The last property we discuss is the melting and boiling points. Now, metals have high melting and boiling points. They vaporize and melt at very high temperatures. Example, iron needs 1535 degrees Celsius to melt, whereas copper needs 1083 degrees Celsius to melt. Whereas there are some exceptions, sodium and potassium, these melt at very low temperatures. They melt at less than 100 degrees Celsius. Non-metals, they have comparatively low melting point and boiling points. Exception is there, graphite. Graphite is the only non-metal which have high melting and boiling points. That's all for today. Thank you.